The submersible glided silently over the seabed towards the dome's lowest level. Grawl raised up and growled softly. They were undetected, as he had assumed the mares were distracted by the arrival of the aliens. He looked back at his companions as the hairs on his back bristled. Soon they would consummate. In space, from distance, the planet radiated a uniform deep blue, but the closer they got, the more it appeared it was far from consistent. One hemisphere was clear skies broken only by wisps of high white cirrus, the other a dark, turbulent storm. Its axis was vertical to its orbit, which was almost circular, suggesting there was but the single season year-round. It had 5 moons, 2 with contra-orbits with elliptic orbits that took them halfway to the next planet. Apparently once upon a time it had more, but at least 2 had collided, creating the planet's own asteroid belt. It was in all ways a strange place, yet the strangest was its location. Situated beyond the influence of a black hole, it had no sun. Instead, the heat and light that kept it habitable was from that given out by the black hole's accretion disk. Cylon could see the looks on their faces. It wasn't always like this. Once it was what our ancestors once saw as paradise. Jet assumed she was referring to the planetary peculiarities, seen far more weird. His reply confused her. I mean between our people. Oh, I though you. But Rosie interrupted him. What happened? Alien contact, with your ancestors. None of the crew wanted to speak, so she carried on. We were extremely devout and the ocean was fundamental to our religion. It was, and is, she added quickly, the giver, sustainer and taker of life. The arrival of your ancestors shook that belief to its very core. What changed? Began Chubb, until Rosie gave us a reprimanding look. Celian gave a wry smile. We realized we were not alone. I'm sorry, Jet said softly. Celian shrugged. There's no need for you to be. In hindsight, we were our own worst enemy once the realization set and we welcomed the industrial age and with it our own demise. It seemed a small price, amazing technology in exchange for a few minerals that we had no use for. Blankets and iron nails, muttered Chubb. It's how man has always begun an occupation. There was a short silence. Nobody had anything to say to break it, yet they all wanted to. At last Rosie did. Where do I get the star down? She said hesitantly, as she guided the silver star through the lower atmosphere. The damage they had received on the ant planet hadn't been a problem in space, but now once more in an atmosphere she could feel the instability. But we are going to have to stay down until the damage is patched up. Jet nodded in understanding. As they descended they could see why it had its color. The hemisphere below was completely covered in water, a single, endless ocean, from pole to pole. It seemed impossible that not far away the thick cloud indicated the location of the single huge land mass. The planet was at both the same time a place of calm and a place of chaos. There, that way. Cylon pointed to the open, distant horizon of the ocean. Rosie turned the starship in the direction. It was quickly apparent that going against the planet's rotation, night was falling rapidly. Then in the failing light there was a glimmer, but there was no land, instead the flickering of what at first glance was an area of phosphorescence. Cylon indicated they slow, and as they came over it and it became clear that the light source was below the surface, but it wasn't what they assumed. Below, a huge circular area of water began to bubble and move. It churned and revolved like a massive whirlpool as it lowered. They watched in awe as the level plunged, leaving sheer-sided walls of ocean. Cool, said Chubb, impressed. Cylon smiled. The ocean is our home. Our species has always lived between the two, land and sea. Your kind made a choice when your ancient ancestors crawled out of the water. You gave away your aquatic heritage, we females did not. She touched the side of her neck, indicating what appeared to be a series of tattooed lines. Jet glanced back to Thea. She too had the same markings. I gotta get me some of those, Rosie said half-jokingly. Silent took her at her word. Our Medikians can arrange that. I can picture you as a mermaid, Rosie. They all turned to see Chubb with a big grin on his face. Our terminology doesn't have the same meaning, but granted in yours we would be. Jet looked sternly at Chubb, his stare warning him not to offer any more information. There are islands, continued Silent as Rosie nervously guided the star into the aquatic chasm. Created out of great beds of weed and reeds that float and carry in the currents. Our ancestors learned to survive on these islands, and once we were at home on them. Jet looked down trying to find one, but by now they were descending below the water level. You don't live on them now? No, we females had created habitats back below the waves for safety. Chubb could hold back no longer, and before she could say more he interrupted. I'm confused. You said we females. What about your men? They heard Thea make a hissing sound. Silent's smile disappeared and her words became sharper. It is a subject we do not willingly talk about. Chubb shook his head in sympathy. They're all gone? No. Silent said reluctantly. They survive, we live apart. Ignoring Jet's glare, Chubb continued. That can't do too much good for relationships. We have no relationships. We have no contact. She hesitated. They raid our isolated colonies, and make our people slaves. We do the best we can to protect ourselves. It seemed incredible that a humanoid race could continue to exist when it was split on gender. Jen at least was curious to know more, but he could see it was something the women didn't want to talk about, so he changed the subject. Below he could see the last of the water drain away and the star settled on a sandy seabed. So where are we? We about to enter Pielaria, one of our, what you would call cities. It is the center for my work. A sound penetrated the ship, something between a grinding and sliding as the walls of the shaft fragmented and began revolving around, like the petals of a huge flower closing around the starship. Jet felt uneasy as if they were being grasped by a monstrous machine. Rosie looked at him apprehensively, obviously feeling the same, but Chubb looked fascinated, realizing his assumption that this utopian Lesbos was more sophisticated than he had initially imagined. As the dome closed above them, the sun's rays created multitudes of rainbows, that slowly disappeared as a torrent of water poured above it. It looks flimsy, but I assure you it has supported the weight for many generations. How? Chubb muttered. How, what? She looked at him innocently. How can you tell what I'm thinking? She smiled cutely. I'm sorry, I should have warned you. Our species has some telepathic abilities, do not be concerned. We do not use this ability. It is not considered polite in our society, but if there is a strong, say something like intense curiosity, when you are concentrating deeply, some things became clear to us. Jet looked at Chubb as Chubb slunk from the room trying to think only of engines and maintenance. He knew he needed to keep a very clear and focused mind from now on. She smiled mischievously and glanced at Rosie. I will let you in on a little secret. She looked Jet directly in the eye. Jumble your thoughts, too long on one makes it much easier for us to. Jet felt his jaw sag and his face flush. Celian turned away. They are waiting. Jet followed, stepping down the star's boarding ramp onto the still wet seabed. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness he could see a carpet of light where domes covered the seabed nearby, in twinkling light. The lights they had seen from the air were not fluorescence but habitation. A door opened to reveal 5 women. Towards the front was an older woman, stern and official, beside her were 4 others, looking distinctly threatening, and as the old saying went, armed to the teeth. Before they had even passed through the opening the woman spoke. You are not welcome on Pielaria, You should leave immediately. Jet was speechless. He hadn't expected a ticker tape welcome, but neither did he expect to be dismissed so offhandedly. We answered a distress call and have brought citizens of Pielaria back to your planet. Your help was not needed. We are capable of mounting our own rescue mission. Jet had every intention of being polite, but the woman had set the tone. Considering that we answered the call, obviously you are not. We make the choice of what becomes of our citizens. Where we come from, we don't choose who survives, we help all that need it. You know nothing of our society or our abilities, yet you make ill-informed judgments. It is the reason of people like you that our planet is closed. Starting off on the wrong foot, wasn't even close. People like me? Jet smiled. You mean male people? You will have to excuse Gira. Jet turned to the new voice. Another woman was approaching alone. I am Elena, and you are? I am Jet, and these are Chubb and Rosie, he indicated to his side. Then I welcome you all. I am the first among equals in Pielaria. Jet nodded politely, his eyes still looking at Gira. No doubt you know our civilization is entirely female, and as you have been made aware, we not only discourage male visitors, we forbid them. I can assure you neither I or my friend wish to offend your society, or remain here. Jet hoped Chubb was listening. We only intended to return your citizens, but in their rescue our ship was damaged. We ask enough time to carry out an emergency repair to that damage, and once the craft is capable we will leave immediately. It is the least we can do in return, but we ask that you do not leave this area. Elena looked at Rosie. Of course that does not apply to your female associate. Instead I ask that I may have the opportunity to show her something of our society. Rosie looked at Jet smugly. Jet shrugged. If she is okay with your invitation, I have no objection. Elena's voice took on a firmer tone. She does not need your permission, here women make their own choices. Rosie looked at Jet, and I alone make mine. I would appreciate the opportunity to experience a true maternal society. It was safer to not respond, so Jet just smiled. Elena looked at him again. We will not be able to allow you access to our work facilities, but we have engineers who can assist with what is necessary, or needs to be done. Thank you, but if you will excuse me for saying so, it makes the offer sound as if we're being placed in custody. Your perception is of no consequence, but you will understand that all societies have areas that are culturally sensitive. We are a society of women, having men free to roam where and as they wish is deeply offensive to some of our people. Jet looked at Rosie. Well, I'll see you soon, or maybe. He was sure she was smirking. Jet and Chubb were left standing as the group of women turned and walked away. He was slightly surprised to see Celian and Thea stayed. You have to forgive them, they have no experience of men other than what is in our culture. I'm assuming that what's there isn't complementary to our gender? No. It wasn't always that way though. It told that we once had a community with them, until the diverging, at that time everything changed. Hang on, Jet said slowly, this is connected with us, outsiders isn't it? Yes, your ancestors brought not only industry to pollute the planet but ideas to the minds of our males. Instead of equality they wanted to control. Misogyny found fertile minds, flourished and destroyed the harmony we once had. In the end we fled to the ocean. Chubb shook his head. So all the women up and walked out? No, it wasn't like that simple. Some could not escape and remain subjugated. We, the sisters, created another existence. Chubb looked uncomfortable. If you have no contact with the men, then how? Cylon looked at him and smiled. Not all of us have the same opinion of your gender. No, but even so, a society. Everything is for sale and to be bought, and in copulation the male cells are produced far in excess of the need. Jet was feeling slightly uncomfortable, but Silence seemed at ease. The cells can be manipulated for the genetic optimum, both socially and physically. Chubb grunted, "That doesn't sound like much fun." Jet was sure she winked at him as she spoke. "Of course, as a last resort there's always the natural way to introduce diversity." Jet felt he knew enough, at least as much as he wanted to hear. "Obviously the same doesn't apply to the men of your race." "No, they hunt us." "What?" Jet blurted. "Young males form groups and seek to take partners when they have the opportunity." Jet shook his head. "And people just accept this?" "No, accept is not what we do, but we do not seek genocide. The males have a right to continue to exist as much as we do, so in your language maybe truce would be more applicable." Celian gave a cute smile. "I'm sorry, our society may seem bitter or extreme, and maybe it is a reaction too far, but your history is not ours. What is acceptable in one's place is not acceptable in another. That is something I have learned since I have seen the worlds outside ours. If it's any consolation, we women who leave the sanctity of the community are considered tainted, being in the company of men. Many think the situation we can find ourselves in, unsupervised, degrade our commitment to our society. That's a fairly harsh way of putting being rescued and returned here. Once you have gone we will have to be re-educated." Jet felt bad. He didn't like the sound of tainted or re-educated. "Then I'm sorry to have caused you problems. If you hadn't we could be dead. Anyway, it's just bureaucracy. Nothing will happen until you are gone. Until then it'll give us time to talk." Rosie looked at herself in the mirrored door. Revealing the robe was not sublimely comfortable. It felt soft and had a pleasant touch to her skin. She felt something she had not felt in some time, feminine. She opened the door and saw a group of women sat in a kind of loose circle. Elena looked towards her and indicated a couch. It felt like she glided across to the seat. A woman handed her a flute of pink liquid. As she took a sip, the perfumed drink seemed to hover in her tongue's taste buds. "You wear the gown as if it is you own." "It is a long time since I owned such a dress." "Then you do injustice to your femininity." "If only it was possible." "Everything is possible if you choose it to be so." Rosie felt uncomfortable. The conversation was bringing feelings she had long since suppressed. "Tell me about your community," trying to force her memory away. "That would take far more time than I have." Elena smiled. "Yet there is little to say. We are as you can see." "You brush away the obvious. There are no males." "And that is a requirement?" "Some would say yes, at least a flourish. But as you have observed we do." "You share the planet with them?" "It is something we do not dwell on. There is no interconnection. We are two entirely different worlds, within the one." "What about resources? Surely there must be something on land that you require and they in the oceans." "We have our artificial islands. They get what they need as they can." "No interaction at all?" "No." Rosie giggled at the thought of life without men, or was it just the drink affecting her? "It's almost impossible for someone from your culture to imagine what ours once was. There was a time we lived in the shallower water and tide lines." Celian sounded melancholy. "The primates lived on land. Often we had no idea where they were until," her face took on a more serious attitude. "They would converge without warning and take groups of our society away." His mind was in a nice place, but the violence implied in her words shook him back to reality. "They abducted them?" "And still do. We see you prime males as a threat, and that's why you are not welcomed." "But we won't." He stopped speaking. She could read his mind and he tried to think of something else. "I understand, but all men are not the same. That is not our past experience. Men were the aggressors and we the victims. Yet men were also our saviors. When your ancestors arrived they not only took ores and minerals from the land but also the ocean. They built vast undersea complexes for their operations, structures that are now home to our society. Jet nodded, of course. I was wondering. At first we used them as a refuge, but over time we too understood and worked that technology, until we created the home we now inhabit. I'm no stranger to the isolation of the camps, but in my experience periodic absences often strengthens a relationship. That is as you say in your experience. Males are superfluous to our sisterhood, so that cohabitation is unthinkable. We have our freedom and will not surrender it. To my people you are a man and no different to the primates they have experienced and been warned against. Jet shook his head. You don't expect me to agree with that? No, I don't expect you do, but you assume we are the same, which we are not. We are both branches of the same lineage but not the same fruit. Wow, muttered Chubb, awkward. No, a tragedy for us both. Jet was becoming uneasy where the conversation was going. Chubb, he interrupted before any more leading questions were asked, we need to fix the star and leave. Easier said than done. The tear was clean. I have to be careful that I don't stress the plates by stretching them too far. There is a workshop, said Celine, there are tools and equipment. Maybe there is something there that may be of use? Jet looked at Chubb. I guess that's worth a look. Okay, show me where it is. Rosie was suitably impressed. The city, while nowhere near as large as many she had visited, was huge considering it was completely covered by ocean. The buildings were far from the tallest too. Once she had shot up a turbo lift to look down from 12 clicks high, but even at 12 stories they still looked impressive. The thoroughfares were clean and neat, and the population orderly and seemingly content, though for her part Rosie felt it was all strangely unreal. Men really could be a pain, and there were occasions where a female society appealed to her sense of sanity, but here her sanity seemed just as confused. She remembered her mother's half-serious words, men, you can't live with them, and you can't live without them. Here they were living without them, and yet something more that just the opposite sex was missing. After a brief tour of the city she met Elena again for lunch. They sat opposite each other in a public, and by the number of tables occupied, an apparently popular restaurant. I was extremely impressed, she said truthfully. And if you were to stay there is much more to see. The offer surprised her. Stay, you mean for longer? Permanently, if you wanted to. Your welcoming committee didn't give me the impression that was an option. Gira is very good at her job, but she can take it a little too seriously. I don't mean to imply that security is not important, but she sometimes is unable to merge it with reality. She doesn't like men. On the contrary, she, like many of our citizens, do not hate men, they distrust them and reject men's controlling nature, but deep in our minds and far in our history they have a place. But women from any time and place are okay? I hate to use the word interbreeding, but a closed population is not the healthiest of communities. That's why we welcome additions that can improve our gene pool. Rose was slightly shocked. She was very heterosexual, too much so on occasion. I have to be honest with you, but there are people. An image of Chubb came to mind. Who would see such as akin to lesbianism? Elena laughed quietly. There's a saying that goes something like love is blind. How others see any aspect of our society gives us more reason to rebuff any male stereotyping. It's not always males. Rosie gave a weak smile in reply. Then after what you have seen, are you one of those of that opinion? What I have seen is in many ways utopia. Then maybe you should consider my offer. Grawl saw the couple approach. Surprisingly, one was a man. There could be no other expectation that he had to be from the recently arrived air machine. He shrunk back into the shadows in caution, but the mare appealed to him. She was what they had come for, even if the man looked powerfully built. He would be a problem, but the couple were totally oblivious to any danger. It was worth the risk. Grawl indicated to his companions that they do the same as he slid a tiny dart into the blowpipe. Taking in a deep breath, he raised it to his jowls. Jet's first reaction was that a biting insect had stung his neck. He wasn't concerned, other than it seemed a weird thing to be happening at the bottom of the ocean. That was until he saw Celian's terrified expression. She looked at him, her mouth opening in a silent scream, and then she collapsed. Quickly he caught her mid-fall as another insect bit him. He began to feel his own legs weaken and only then noticed the tiny dart embedded in Celian's throat. It took all his remaining strength to twist and fall to the ground beside her rather than crashing down on top. Jet lay paralyzed. He could see and hear but couldn't move a muscle. Then an odor flooded into his nose. Wet fur was as near as he could place it. Then a foot was silently in front of his eyes. It wasn't fully a primate, but neither was it human. It was something in between. A missing link. He couldn't raise his eyes to look up, but there were others moving silently about, and then he fleetingly saw Celian's arm. Moments later they were gone and he was alone. Chubb was hanging over the repair, holding a section of tubing. "Can you pass that yellow clip, on the bench, over there?" he said, turning a little to face Thea, but the woman did not respond. Instead her face held a look of fear. Chubb spoke slowly, not sure what was the problem. "Are you okay?" "They have her," she replied, her voice quivering. "Hurry, they have her." "They? Whoever?" "The primates." Suddenly she snapped into movement, almost running to a control panel and stamping her delicate fingers against it. Immediately a nearby siren began to wail. Rosie was not quite asleep. She didn't want to miss a second of the absolute pleasure she was enjoying. After a marvelous dinner, she had been escorted, in a slightly inebriated state, to a gorgeous, feminine room. For a brief while she wondered if this was the norm or something to impress her. Truth was, she didn't care. The bathroom was something out of a magazine and a universe away from the stark, unappealing sonic shower on the Star. She relaxed in the hot, perfumed, soapy bath, and dried her body on warm towels so fluffy they felt like feathers over her skin. Elena had promised a manicure, pedicure, and every other cure she had heard of after breakfast, and now she was wearing a diaphanous nightdress, draped by silky sheets on a bed not too soft and not too hard. If this was living in a lesbian utopia, then she was very close to giving it a try. Her thoughts had been so indulged that she had not heard someone enter the room until she felt a hand gently on her shoulder. Her body froze and her eyes stayed shut as she imagined Elena about to climb in beside her. "Madam, please wake up." The voice was far from seductive and actually sounded panicked. "Madam, wake up." The hands shaking became more insistent. She opened her eyes to see a young woman dressed in domestic uniform. "What's the matter?" she said as the lovely thoughts evaporated. "You must leave, immediately." "Leave? Now?" Rosie didn't want to. The bed felt so wonderful, she couldn't leave it, ever. "The First Lady is evacuating the lower levels. You cannot stay. She insists you be with her." The young woman was tearing off the soft warm bedclothes, and Rosie felt herself pulling them back over her. "Madam," the girl said in exasperation. "You must get up now." Rosie submitted, releasing her hold on the sheets, and lay still, unmoving as the air chilled her warm flesh. The girl was across the room pulling clothes from a wardrobe. "These will be quick to dress in." She raced over, carrying an unflattering jumpsuit that Rosie had rejected as the least likely thing she would wear for breakfast in the morning, but in moments she was patting down the seals and was dressed. Slipping on some knee-high boots, she followed the girl from the room. Elena was in the foyer. "At last," she said in relief. "I was afraid we would have to leave you this way quickly." "What's happening?" gasped Rosie as she followed the entourage. "The city has been breached." We are evacuating until we understand the danger. Breached, it's being flooded? No, the primates, it seems your arrival has emboldened them. Where are we going? A fortified enclosure. What about Jet, my companions? As yet we don't know. Chubb was having trouble keeping up with Thea as they ran along corridor and down ramp and stair. The further they went, to more merwomen joined them, but these were not ordinary citizens, these were of Gira's ilk. These merwomen worked out. They were muscled and their faces had a determined look. They all carried long staffs, ending in a curved trident blade at one end, and a fist-sized club at the other. Suddenly Chubb wished he had brought a pistol. Then they saw Jet, leaning back against the wall with 3 merwomen around him. One was Gira, she was arguing with him. I'm going after her. Chubb heard Jet forcefully say. There is nothing you can do. Gira snapped back, she is lost. Chubb couldn't hold back his opinion, that's not a word in his vocabulary. Gira turned as their group slowed, it isn't ours, and it's the law. We don't risk others of our society in acts of stupidity charading as bravery. Then you deserve to lose your people. Chubb immediately regretted his words, even if he didn't regret the intent. What would you know? Isn't it obvious we have neither the weapons nor bodies to fight them? One can be changed, one can't be. Chubb. Jet's voice cut into the exchange, they don't have to. We can use the star. We can't fly Jet. You were looking for parts, remember? And when you have them you will leave this planet immediately. They all turned to see Elena. No, we, argued Jet. Yes, immediately, snapped back Elena, are you blind? This is why we reject your kind. No matter where you come from you can only see that violence is always the solution. And your answer is to refuse to accept what is happening. How dare you think you understand us? You can never know what we think and feel. Guys, everybody, interrupted Rosie, let's agree to disagree. She looked at Elena. We will do as you ask, as soon as the ship can leave the planet we will be gone. Elena's warmth of before had gone, until it has there will be no interaction with our citizens, is that understood? Rosie looked sternly at Jet, other than any required to repair the ship, and make sure Jet has the care he needs. Elena looked at one of the mares tending the Jet, who offered up her open palm, in it were tiny darts, your friend will be well soon enough. The venom acts only with contact, once removed it no longer has any effect. They are the dorsal spikes of the firefish. It seeks out dangerous places, tempting others to devour it. Being impaled with one is enough to render its attacker paralyzed. Then potential victim then becomes predator. She looked at the spikes. 7 should have killed anyone, yet he is alive. Do not waste this gift of continued life. She turned away, leave this planet. The group followed her, leaving only the crew and Thea. Rosie watched them go and then turned to Jet. I'm sorry Jet, but she's probably right. Even if there was a way to get her back we have no idea where they took her. The group was silent until Thea spoke softly. I know where she is. I mean I don't actually know where, but I can follow her to wherever she's gone. She seemed nervous as she continued, we have a cerebral bond. A connection as if you would follow a sound or a creature a scent. It will last for only a short time before it is lost like any other trace. Jet struggled unsteadily to his feet, then let's get the star fixed. No, the primates would be aware, as would Elena, but I have another way. Come, we will achieve both tasks by continuing to the workshop area. Leaving Chubb to forage for what he needed, Jet and Rosie followed Thea to an adjacent area, and to the machines it housed. There are many, some obviously out of commission. Thea led them to several similar-looking, that looked like they were some form of craft for traveling in the water environment. They are called ceropods, said Thea. The peoples who built these cities used them to go outside for many purposes. Jet stepped around the craft. They still work, he said dubiously. We are forbidden to use them, so I cannot answer your question, but there's no other way. Jet couldn't see any hatch or door. How do we get in? As I said, we are not allowed to use them, so I do not know. Rosie stepped past them both and gestured with her hand. A section the hull opened. Jet looked at her stunned. How? It's the same technology, Jet. These were built by the same hands that created the Silver Star. Jet went to get in and then stopped. He looked at Rosie. I hope I'm not getting into my own coffin. Rosie smiled. Jet, they are built by the creators, she said reassuringly. I'll try and remember that when I'm entombed on the ocean floor. We are entombed, she replied. Jet tried not to think too much about how close her words were to fact. Rosie, this isn't a place where they welcome women. Though it was the reverse. You know what I mean. I do, and I'm still coming. Before he could raise any objection, Thea interrupted. I'm coming too. Thea, you out of all of us must realize that danger we could encounter. Celine is my sister. I must do all I can, whatever the cost. Including breaking your own laws? I break a greater one by abandoning her. Jet shook his head ruefully. I'm beginning to wonder if I have doomed all of us. Jet was sat behind the two women as the sauropod moved silently over the seafloor. He had no idea of distance. It was dark and the features the lights picked out were just blurs. It wasn't an environment he felt at home, and that just added to his unease, whether that was the residual effects of the toxin or the fact that he was taking two women into a danger he wasn't sure he could get them out of. Both had insisted they come. Thea was obviously needed, and proved such by directing where they go. Rosie had convinced him she was the best qualified to operate the tech. Then the sensors picked up a massive object just ahead, so big that it was too wide to scan. This is where she is, said Thea apprehensively. While the sensors couldn't pick up the distant edge of the rock face in front of them, it could pick out changes in terrain, and they glided to a smooth section. Set at the center was a perfectly symmetrical cave, a tunnel. I don't see any signs of life, Jet. There will be, he replied, but Thea contradicted him. No, why should there be? They do not fear us. Her assurance didn't convince him. We can't be sure of that. We have to assume some form of electronic surveillance at least. Rosie agreed. If they do, Jet, they are bound to see us coming. Not if they assume we are juvenile sauropods by swimming in. They are known for lurking in fissures in the rock, Jet, and Rosie looked at Thea. Jet shrugged. Maybe you can, but I can't hold my breath for whatever length that tunnel is long. You don't need to. Thea opened a cabinet and took out a pair of small face masks. This will give you air enough to breathe. I thought you said. She gave a mischievous smile. I said we were forbidden to use them. There is nothing said about exploring them. Rosie reached out to take one, but Jet stopped her. We don't have an exit plan. That's because we don't know what we'll be escaping from. Exactly, and that's why you need to get this thing to wherever to get us away. You want me to stay here, she said indignantly. Rosie, think about it. We could stir up a Hellnet's hive. I can look after myself. I know you can, but it makes sense for you to be ready to get us away from here. Rosie looked at Jet in a smug way. If I must, then make sure your communicator is switched on. Jet gently tapped his left shoulder. Be careful. Jet and Thea emerged from the hatch into the water. He was feeling a measure of thermal shock, but the woman seemed instantly at home and quickly led the way. He struggled to keep up. It wasn't his preferred medium, but through sheer bodily strength he managed it. The effort was not without cost, and soon he began to feel fatigue. Thankfully they soon approached the tunnel entrance. What had looked like a technological marvel from the sauropod felt plain ominous as the darkness inside closed around them, but Jet didn't have time to think too much about vague fears when one was becoming reality in front of him. The water suddenly felt as if it was moving, as if a wall of pressure was building up, making it harder to move forward. His mind was still trying to make sense when he felt Thea's fingers grasp at his clothing. She was tugging, pulling him aside. For a moment he tried to resist, and then he saw the shape. It was big and growing bigger, quickly emerging from the gloom. His first thought was they had been detected, but then the shape opened and revealed a huge mouthful of what were without doubt razor-sharp teeth. Too late, Jet twisted sideways away from the gaping jaws, but not from the bulk as it smashed into his lower back. He gasped, uttering a cry of surprise mixed with an equal amount of pain. Then the moment was over, and all there was the swirling water. Jet tumbled and spun until he felt the steadying grip of Thea's hands. He tried to force back the panic, relax and breath again. None were possible as he realized his breathing apparatus had been knocked from his mouth. He tried to find Thea's face in the semi-darkness to let her know. Instead, she was dragging him on, away from wherever the mouthpiece lay on the tunnel floor. Jet held his breath, but it was no use, there was none to hold. He could feel the lips on his hungry, desperate lips. Was it a dream? It didn't matter, the feeling was intense and he didn't want it to stop. He tried to stay in the between world, but he couldn't. His lungs were squeezing and bulging as if driving his entire insides out. Suddenly he couldn't ignore or hold it down any longer. With a body-racking spasm he vomited. Immediately hands grabbed him and roughly rolled him over onto his front. Jet's eyes were immediately open. He lay face down in a pool of water as his arms were dragged behind him and pulled back and forwards. He wanted to shout out for it to stop, but his mouth filled and he again vomited water. It tasted gritty, earthy, and his nose pressed into it was overwhelmed with a rotted organic odor. He was conscious now, not fully, but enough to remember water filling his lungs as it bypassed down his gagging throat, and then there had been blackness. The pumping of his arms had become more frantic and he wished it would stop and return to the demanding lips. He began to cough and choke and the violence stopped. Arms grabbed him again and pulled him up. He stayed it around. He was sat in a pool of water. Thea and Rosie leaned over him. One looking concerned, the other reprimanding. "In case you have forgotten, we are trying to remain unnoticed," said Rosie, but her words were delivered with concern. Jet smiled weakly. "Sorry." He looked at both women. "I guess I owe you both a big one?" Thea looked at Rosie. "She probably more." The harshness in Rosie's voice faded as relief took over. "When those things came hurtling out of the entrance, I knew there was trouble." Jet remembered the jaws. "I'm glad you came and got me." Rosie looked at Thea. "Kinda." Thea held onto the sauropod steering fins, "And we gave you a whitewater ride like no other. I knew we weren't far away, so it seemed quicker," Thea added. Jet spoke without thinking, but more dangerous if there had been a waiting party. He looked around as if to reassure himself there wasn't. They were in a room similar to the one beneath the dome but far bigger. There were many sauropods, some on launchers, some partly disassembled. It looked exactly like the place. There should have been a lot of people, but they were alone. "So where's everybody?" Thea seemed reluctant to speak. "The Hall of Events?" Jet looked at her puzzled. "How do you know that?" Rosie answered his question. "Because she's been here before." She looked at the other woman. "Isn't that right?" Thea looked between them. "When the sisters have been brought here, they are prepared and taken to the hall for the ceremony of ownership." "And after that?" Jet hesitated. "No, don't tell me." "I think I get the picture." She replied slightly defensively. "It's not what you imagine." "Well, not exactly. It is the sisters' duty to continue both our society and that of the primates. It is our duty." Rosie could see the woman was at unease. "And male offspring remain here?" Thea nodded meekly. "As was mine." Jet looked between the two women. but it was as if they didn't notice him being there. Rosie nodded in an understanding way. "I'm sorry." Thea shrugged. "It is the way. I am not the first or will be the last." Jet looked puzzled. Then it was as if a light switched on in his brain. Of course, how could it work otherwise? Rosie looked at Jet. "You didn't notice there were female children but no boys back at the dome?" Jet shook his head. A look of determination formed in his expression. "Look, I accept societies work in different ways. It's not my job to change them, but in my society you don't turn your back on your values, and I'm not going to start now. We finish what we came to do, get Celine." Rosie looked at him. "Jet, I'm not going to argue that, but are we looking for more trouble than we can handle?" "There is a way, maybe," Thea said softly. Unafraid of being confronted, guided by Thea, they moved through the corridors quickly. Jet wasn't sure how much of her knowledge was by experience of the ethereal bond she shared with Celine. It didn't matter as soon the tunnel opened into a chamber where other passages converged. Before them was an imposing double door. Jet looked at Thea. "Is this it?" he said softly. She nodded in reply. He opened one of the doors a little and looked inside. It was more of a lecture theater than what he thought of as a hall, but from what he could see there were hundreds, probably thousands of men, and it was just men. From what could be observed there wasn't a single female, other than the one on the raised podium at opposite end of the hall, Celine. Jet felt an urgent tug on his sleeve. He silently closed the door and turned back to Thea. She looked worried. "We must find another way?" "Another way," he said in surprise. "We're here, all we have to do is go through the door?" "I know, but it's Grawl." "So what if it is?" "Grawl is the son of Growlin. He is one of the lords, the only one if he had his way. Grawl is even more ambitious, and dangerous, he sees no equal." "But he will follow the code?" "Yes, he has to, as I explained, and not as an insult to the society." "Then we go ahead." Rosie wasn't so sure. "Jet, are we certain about what we're doing? In the book it says take out the leader and the rest will fall." "I don't think we have the same taste in reading matter." "Military tactics, Rosie." "And what does the book say happens when the leader isn't taken out?" Jet smiled. "Then you get out while the others are still stunned at your audacity." She sighed. "Like I said, I hope we know what we're doing." Jet looked at Thea. "So, where are we in the ceremony?" "It is almost at the point where Gross is given possession." Jet looked at Rosie. "Plan B?" "We have one. If this doesn't work out, I'll create as much confusion as I can. You and Thea hightail it back to the Serapod as fast as possible." "So plan B is just run?" "Yeah, and as fast." Thea touched his arm. "It is time." Jet could hear a voice. Its tone carried a challenge. He looked at Thea. She looked back and nodded once quickly. Jet took a breath, pulled himself as upright as he could, opened the door and strode confidently through. The hall was in silence. On the podium one of the primates was stood waiting in anticipation. He was dressed in ceremonial robes and from his relaxed stance obviously expected the silence to continue. Jet strode down the ramp towards him, neither hurrying or slowly. The man seemed to have not noticed Jet's approach and called out a second time, "If any here offer." Now he saw Jet, and his confidently delivered words had a slight shudder. "Challenge, then now come forward." Jet said nothing as he continued walking. A faint murmur rippled through the auditorium as more and more became aware of his approach to the podium. A multitude of eyes turned towards him. He was halfway down the ramp when the official regained his composure. "If any here offer," he said a third time, this time with more than a hint of expectation in his voice. "Challenge, then now come forward." Now Jet slowed and stopped. He clenched his fist and brought his arm across his chest. "I do." He called out in a firm tone. The official looked agitated. What right do you demand? I claim the right of combat. Every eye in the hall was staring at him, but he felt those of Grawl the most. You are not one of us, replied the official. No, I am not, but the code does not exclude me from me being an outsider. What happens here is not the business of an outsider. It is when that woman is mine. Jet said demandingly. He saw a look of pleasant surprise on Celian's face. Does the priestess know you are here to make this challenge? Jet had no idea who the priestess was, and was about to say so until he heard a faint voice to his side. He glanced back to see Thea. Elena, she said softly. What are you doing here? He whispered out of the corner of his mouth. Are we doing here? Rosie was to his other side. Jet was desperately trying to get back into the character he wanted to project. The official took Jet's hesitation as a deliberate silence. She should be well aware that this is an act that is in breach of the terms of our accord. Jet was about to say she knew nothing, but the man's words puzzled him. Accord? That a truce exists between our societies. We do not attack, and they continue to give our young warriors the right to father. Jet heard Rosie behind him mutter to Thea. Elena agreed to that. He didn't hear the reply. I need no approval, I am here on my own behalf. Then you are either foolish to the point of stupidity, or have audacity that this assembly has never witnessed. Jet shrugged, probably a little of both. More than that, you disregard our code of behavior by bringing your property into the ceremony. Jet desperately wanted to see Rosie's expression. They go where I go. It was pointless arguing the obvious, so he chose to ignore the accusation. The code says you must accept a challenge if one has been made. He didn't know if it did, but it seemed a reasonable assumption. The official looked at Grawl. A challenge has been made. You must accept or allow the outsider to take the mare for himself. Grawl's eyes blazed with fury. He looked down at Jet. The mare is mine, by rights of the accord. You will not take her away from me. An evil grin spread over his face. The official looked at Jet, as the challenged it is Grawl's right to set the condition. Now Jet wondered if he had made a bad move or not, but instead of the choice of a weapon Jet had never used, Grawl looked at the women behind Jet. If the outsider wins, he said almost in a joking way that was picked up by those around them, creating a murmur of soft laughter. He takes my mare. He hesitated and looked out into the audience. When I win, I take his. The hall erupted in cheering and laughter. Jet felt a chill tingle through his body. He looked back at Rosie. She was looking back at him with a look that he couldn't decipher, neither did he want to. The official looked at Jet. You should know that once a challenge has been made and accepted, the code says it cannot be undone without consequence. Jet didn't know that. He looked at Thea, but she would have. She looked back in a resigned calm and spoke softly so that only Jet could hear. Grawl can only set one condition. He forfeited his right to choice of weapons. It is yours to make. Jet shook his head in frustration. You knew that would be his condition? For certain, no, but men, primates, they can be an open book to read? He heard Rosie from his other side. You had better make sure we're all reading from the same page. He looked at Grawl. Then at my choice of weapons? Grawl looked back almost disinterestedly. It matters not to me. I am expert in all forms of blade. He smirked and again laughter filled the air. Then I chose. Jet clenched his fist and punched it into his other cupped palm. Bare knuckle fists. The smile briefly drained from Grawl's face but soon returned. He shrugged and looked at the official. A fist, is that a weapon? There was slight trace of hope it wasn't in his question. The official was hurriedly discussing with a small group that had appeared as if from nowhere. The code states that a weapon will be held in an unprotected hand, he stated at last. Jet showed no expression as he listened to Thea speak again behind him and then spoke her words. I point out that the condition you quote continues with, both bare hands can be used, if so chosen. Again they're an agitated grouping until the official at last turned to him. We believe that is not the intent in the code, but as it is unclear the wording excludes what you propose, we have no choice but to approve your choice of weapons. Combat may begin. The official turned to address that hall. Graal's son Graalin of the tribe of Grail has had his right to father challenged by. He hesitated and spoke as if he had a bad taste in his mouth, an outsider. Graal accepts the challenge and will assert his right by combat. The hall erupted in cheering and applause. Jet heard Rosie mutter to his side, "Talk about home side advantage?" The official waited until the cacophony died down a little. The rule of combat is, there are no rules. Combatants will continue until one yields, can no longer fight, or is dead. He looked at Jet and then at Graal. Prepare yourselves. He turned and descended the steps from the platform and indicated Jet do the reverse. As Jet came level with Graal, the man was stripping off his robes. Jet looked at his body, trying to seek out what could be to his advantage. It was hard to tell with humanoid alien species how close their bodies resembled his, but essentials remained. Bodies needed bone or stiff cartilage to remain upright. They needed air passages. The list was long but not certain. What was clear was that Graal was not unfit. Jet stood opposite him and unfastened his still damp jacket. It like the shirt he pulled off next would be a hindrance. He heard a faint gasp from those close by as his moist muscles rippled and reflected the flickering light of the flaming torches arranged around the podium. Graal looked intently too, but his eyes were on the scars that seemed to cover every part of the outsider's torso. The slow backbeat of a drum-like instrument began. An attendant scooped the clothing up as others produced a length of rope. Graal reached out his arm, extending his fingers towards Jet. By gestures the attendants encouraged Jet to do the same until their fingertips were barely a hair's breadth apart. Then the rope was tied around their waists, binding them together. The attendants departed, and then starting at the hall's furthest reaches, the flames within the ornamental grates throughout the building slowly began to fade inwards, towards the podium. In the silence and the growing darkness the backbeat morphed into a slow drum roll. Soon it was as if it was just Jet and Graal, trapped in an ever-shrinking pool of light as even those torches close to the podium dimmed. Jet knew it was all theatrics and ceremony and almost certainly meant to unnerve him. He tried to stay calm, waiting for whatever was to signal the start of pain. Whatever it was, he missed it as the lights were extinguished and the hall fell into total darkness. In an instant the torches grouped around the podium exploded back into brilliant light and Graal made his move. The man fell back and pulled hard at the rope, causing Jet to stumble forward slightly. Before he could regain his balance, Graal stepped forward and kicked Jet in the groin. Taken unawares, Jet fell to his knees gasping. Pain surged in his abdomen as his ears were filled with cheers from the crowd. Through tear-filled eyes Jet could just make out Graal strutting around, arms raised, relishing the applause. He strutted around his apparently vanquished victim, and formed his wrist into an axe, lifting it high to slam into the back of Jet's neck. His entertaining the wild crowd delayed the blow, and before he could, Jet twisted and brought his elbow up into Graal's groin. It was a guess. If Graal intended to father Sully, and then it could be expected he had the same tools to do so. The cheering instantly changed into a shocked gasp as now Graal screamed in pain and fell to his knees beside Jet. Jet slowly stood. "So that's how it's going to be, is it?" he said as he grabbed Graal's head by the hair, twisted it back and smashed his fist into his face. Blood splattered their bodies. "Now that's what I meant by a fist fight," he said as he now moved behind Graal. He lifted his foot, placing it firmly on the man's back before kicking out, sending Graal sprawling to the edge of the raised platform. "If you want street fighting, then so be it." Graal lay still, an arm hung over the edge, the other clutching the base pole of a grate as a murmur of disbelief rippled around the hall. He lay there for so long that Jet began to wonder if somehow he had thrown the winning blow, and then using the pole Graal slowly pulled himself up, The crowd urged him, but less enthusiastically than before. Jet changed his stance and readied himself for any lunge, but Grawl didn't move. Instead he lifted the arm that had hung over the edge. He flexed his fingers and glistening steel's claws protruded from the very same fingertips Jet had almost touched before they began. The crowd gasped, half in excitement and half in shocked surprise. Jet had seen them before, in the back alleys of Culver City. They had called them cat's claws then. A cruel exoskeleton worn on the hand. Its only purpose to inflict pain or fatal trauma. Grawl smiled a menacing smile as he turned on the spot, shortening the rope and the distance between them. He swiped his hand in the space. Jet stepped back, but the rope prevented him moving far. Grawl was obviously being cautious, ensuring Jet did not get the chance to grab his wrist. A chant had begun as he again turned, shortening the rope to the point where Jet was forced to lean away. His only defense now was to make a lunge when Grawl turned his back again, but Grawl didn't. Instead he lunged forward, swiping out, the cruel hooks digging into the left of Jet's chest. Grawl stepped back, pulling his arm with him, dragging Jet's flesh up in grotesque flaps before the sharp blades ripped out of his skin. Agony raked through Jet's body as blood poured from the wounds and streaked down his chest to pool in his waistband. The dark stain began to spread over his lower clothing. Now, with Jet in full pain and unable to respond, Grawl turned a final time. This time he gauged his distance and swiped again at Jet. The claws scraped across his stomach, leaving long this welts that immediately oozed blood. He leaned forward. "In your last moments, think of me enjoying your mares," he almost spat. Rosie looked on in horror. She was so distraught that she ignored the insistent pull at her wrist. Then she felt something cold and hard pressed into her palm. She could barely tear her eyes away from the dreadful sight, but she did and looked in disbelief at what she was clutching. Turning quickly, she tried to see who had put it there, but everyone close by was intently staring at the two fighters. "Jet, here," she screamed at the top of her lungs. Jet was frantically trying to anticipate Grawl's next move. That it involved the claws was beyond doubt, but one thing was clear: Grawl didn't want to kill him yet. The cat's claw was an assassination weapon. Tearing your victim to pieces was for the psychopaths. Assassins would casually reach around over their target's shoulder and tear out their jugular. What was sure was he needed more distance. Jet turned side on and quickly leaned down from the waist, lifting his leg in the same movement to hook behind Grawl's knee. Twisting back, he pulled Grawl's leg from under him. Grawl stumbled back. Jet grabbed the rope and tore it towards him, sending Grawl off balance. The rope unwound from his waist and again Jet had room to move. It was then he heard Rosie's scream. At first he thought she was in trouble, but she was waving something at him. Then it was in the air and coming at him. He wasn't sure what she had thrown, and then it hit the floor close by, sliding toward, then past him towards the opposite end of the platform. Now he could see it was a vicious-looking knuckle-duster. He made a dive towards it. Grawl could see it too and went to intercept. His clawed hand reaching towards Jet's upper arm, the claws digging deep into Jet's flesh, dragging his grasp from the metal grip. Ignoring the pain, Jet dropped his other palm flat to the floor. Pivoting on this arm, he kicked his leg out to slam down, and kicked the duster back moments before it slid over the edge. Grawl saw the weapon within Jet's reach and grabbed Jet's jaw with his free hand, dragging Jet's head back, exposing his throat. Stealing against the pain, Jet pulled against the claw. His flesh was pulled from his arm, but the movement made it hard for Grawl to pull the claws free, giving Jet time to slip his fingers into the grip. It was not a perfect fit, but enough to seat the solid bar across his knuckles. Grawl knew he was leaving it too late and released his hold on Jet's arm, extending the claws as far as they would. He was intent on the soft flesh of Jet's exposed neck. Jet brought the knuckle-duster up with all his might into Grawl's armpit as the man brought the claw within reach of Jet's throat. The fist impacted so hard it lifted Gross off the ground, the claw brushing Jet, leaving 4 shallow cuts across his skin. Jet rolled away as Grawl arched his back and cried in pain. Jet was standing again as Grawl lunged towards him, but the damage had been done. The clawed hand hung at an odd angle, limp from the shoulder. Roll tried to lift the claw, but his arm was either broken or dislocated and he could barely lift it. Instead he crashed into Jet. Jet rolled with the impact and grabbing Grawl twisted the man, lifting him upright before smashing the knuckle duster into his lower chest. Grawl spat out blood and collapsed. Jet followed him down and onto his knees. He hadn't noticed them, but now he was aware the official and a couple of attendants were trying to intervene. Grawl. Yield. He was saying. Blood poured from between his lips. Never, he spat. Jet grabbed the dislocated arm and twisted it back. Grawl howled in pain, but at last he gasped the word, "I yield." Jet released his arm and stood unsteadily. Without waiting for any declaration, he walked in a half-stumble to the steps and off the podium. Rosie, Cellian and Thea rushed to him, holding him up as they all made their way as quickly as Jet could walk up the ramp and out of the stunned, silent hall. It was all a blur to Jet as they got back to the sauropod, and once inside he collapsed and lost consciousnesses. Chubb was sitting in a chair beside the bunk as Jet slowly came around. He was eating some fruit that Jet's confused mind was unable to think of its name. Chubb casually lifted another piece to his mouth. "Some of the girls gave me this stuff to bring for you," he said, chewing noisily. "They said it would do you good." "It's tasty." Jet's jaw ached. He didn't remember being hit in the mouth, but there was a lot about the fight he wanted to forget. "I'll take your word for that." He looked around. He was in his own cabin. "Where are we?" "On the Star." "Yeah, I mean, where's the Star?" "On our way back home." "I don't remember anything after the fight." "I'm not surprised. You are lucky to be alive. You nearly bled out. Nasty thing, that cat's claw. So I guess you want to know what happened while you were out then?" "Something like that?" "Actually, not much." "Well, I suppose that's not quite right. Firstly, we were pretty much kicked off the planet." "Oh," Jet lay back and moaned. "You're not popular, are we?" "Well, not quite true. Apparently the medical images of your scared body have become a must-have sleeping quarters decoration." Chubb laughed. "Though I don't think it's on that Elena's wall." "The girls, they are okay?" "You mean, are they in trouble?" "We offered to take them wherever, but they stayed. Thea said things won't change without somebody changing them." "Not sure about Rosie. She keeps muttering something about harems and eunuchs. For some reason she seems to associate that second thing with your name." Chubb looked at Jet as his face broke into a wide grin.